All right. Good afternoon. We are live here at Moneyline MMA. Nick and Jose coming to you guys to discuss UFC 303 coming up this Saturday, June 29th. Second pay per view of the month coming out of Las Vegas. Normal card start times for us. Won't be any daytime fights like last weekend. Main card starting at 9 p.m. Central Time, as always, with the prelims starting at 5 p.m. The early ones starting at 5 p.m. Regular prelims 7, main card 9, and main event around midnight. As usual for the Central Time audience, we've got, of course, huge replacement fights, huge number of replacement fights for this card. Of course, Carlos Alberg was supposed to fight Anthony Smith, who replaces him. Anthony Smith, should I say, replaces him. Then Carlos Alberg has to back out. It's just an interesting scenario. That fight turns into two fighters that weren't even initially on the card are now fighting each other in the main event. Anthony Smith and Delize, that is, because after Alberg dropped out, Delize stepped in. Also, Jamal Hill was going to fight on this card. Roundtree was going to fight on this card. And, of course, Conor McGregor was supposed to fight Michael Chandler. A whole bunch of changes on this card have led to Alex Pereira versus Jiri Prochazka 2 being the main event. Light heavyweight belt is on the line. And we have some really entertaining fights outside of that. It's not necessarily your insane, middle of July or Independence Day kind of card or UFC 300 kind of card. But Alex Pereira headlining is always exciting. I'm always excited to see what happens. And I would personally say I'm more excited for this than I am McGregor. I'm just not much of a McGregor guy. So I'll leave it at that. I don't think Jose is either. I think Jose, you pretty excited about the changes on this card, or what do you think?
I do think it's a better fight overall. At least the main card, the main event that is, it's a more technical fight. Kind of wish both fighters would have had obviously more time to prepare for this fight, but I think regardless, both those guys live and breathe fighting and are the top of the food chain. So I think, we're gonna get like I think a better like more warrior versus warrior type of fight than we would have with Chandler versus McGregor.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And these dudes both recently fought on UFC 300. Of course, Jiri beating Rakic and Pereira getting the belt. Pretty exciting stuff. So Pereira's defending his belt against Jiri in their second fight. Alex finished Jiri on the first fight. This one will be a little different. Neither of them are theoretically having full camps, and I know Alex Pereira is dealing with some toe injuries himself, which kind of sheds some light as to McGregor backing out of his fight, and Alex Pereira is accepting the fight with messed up toes. Just kind of shows the human beings these two men are and their differences that they have. Alex Pereira, potentially the baddest man on the planet. He needs to fight John Jones. He just needs to at some point. It's just got to happen. But in any case, we'll quickly cover some picks from last week before we head into our picks for UFC 303. And it's just been a great streak for me. 7 in a row now for 5 weights. Robert Whitaker actually was the dual locked 5 weight of the week, and it hits. So to everybody who was listening and followed along with Jose and I on that lock of the week, you're continuing to make money. And on top of that, we had some disagreements. I was able to get Jose with the Volkov pick as my 4 weight, and he did exactly what I thought he would do. And Pavlovich got some shots in there, but he wasn't good enough to get the knockout straight up. Unfortunately, one Jose and I both called wrong was the Walker loss, and boy was it bad. He got Jose and I were talking about it like every time he gets knocked out, it's just in some like circus clown way. Like he just gets knocked out in these crazy ways, dude. And it's like the highlight reel of the year. Johnny Walker getting knocked out by some dude. So, dude, yeah, it's just one of those things. But Shara Magomedov, Jose and I both picked him independently. He was my 3 weight. I was a little more confident, and boy, he just showed out. Absolute damage with leg kicks. Continued the pace. Had great defensive wrestling to not get taken down very much. Grabbed the fence really badly once. Should have gotten penalized, but in the end it wouldn't have mattered because he got the KO finish. So good for Shara. Won some good money on that one. And overall, it was a good card. Both Jose and I went above 500. I went 4-1. Jose had 3 wins, 2 losses. We're going to continue this heat coming into UFC 303. To anyone that is new, is not aware how we make our picks around here, we do a 5-weight pick system in which there are 13 fights for UFC 303. We'll pick 5 of the fights on that card, and we'll weigh them in order of confidence, with the 5-weight being the most confident and the 1-weight being the least confident of the 5 picks. So we make these picks independently, and then just before the show, we hop on, and since we do them in order of 5-weight to 1-weight, we just discuss who we're picking to get the order that we're going to go in for the show. But otherwise, we make these picks independently, and like I said, the 5-weight is essentially, our individual locks of the week. And then if you add up the weight numbers from Jose and I from fighters that match, you'll get the MMA lock of the week. So if I have a 5-weight on somebody that Jose agrees is his 3-weight, that's 8 total weight on that fighter. And if anyone has less than 8, then that fighter will be the lock of the week. So feel free to comment, leave any questions, questions in the comments, or anywhere that's visible, so that we can answer questions if that's confusing to anybody. But without further ado, I'm going to get into my 5-weight of Saturday afternoon. One of the best cards we're going to get for almost another month until the next pay-per-view. And that's going to be the main event. We're going to go straight into it. I'm not going to beat around the bush and talk about some other fight first. We do go in order for weight, so we're always going to do my 5-weight first. But a lot of times, main event doesn't end up being the 5-weight. But in this case, I'm just straight up not going to deny Alex Pereira. He might be the baddest man on the planet. He is my 5-weight. And Jose would know that I'm a big fan of Jiri. Like, I've won a lot of money betting on Jiri against Glover. Won money on betting against him against Rakic in their last fight. And Jiri's he's one of my guys. And I feel like I'm really good at understanding like his advantages, his weakness, and his strengths. And honestly, I was telling Jose, I almost wish he would train a little bit more wrestling and jiu-jitsu, because like I just feel like it would be one of the things he could do to get a hand up on Pereira, because just standing in the pocket with Pereira just doesn't really work, man. Like, Sean Strickland couldn't do it. Izzy could only do it like if he gets a good chant, like a bit of momentum backing on the fence. Like, not many guys, if any, are able to stand there with Alex Pereira and get the job done. And I just don't see that really being Jiri either in this situation. They're both coming off of fighting on the same card, UFC 300. So I understand Pereira has that little toe issue. He's had some time to heal from it, and I don't think he would sign the contract if he genuinely thought it was going to lead to him like having a complication that gives him a loss. Of course, anything's possible in a cage fight, but I just don't see a reason Alex Pereira doesn't do pretty much what he already did to Jiri and get a finish. Like, I think Jiri's going to show out really well. I think he's going to be in amazing shape. And I think he understands that, like, he's not going to be able to just fight Alex over and over and over again. Like, if Alex wins this fight, it's probably it. Like, you don't get to fight a guy like Alex more than twice unless you and him are the only 2 good fighters left. So I do think Jiri really recognizes the importance here. I think he comes out aggressive and really tries to get Alex Pereira on his heels instead of standing forward and throwing heavy strikes. But I'm just not sure how well that's going to work, because, to be honest, man, a guy like Pereira's still strong on his heels, and he could still catch you with something, man. So not somebody I have an interest, not even a morsel of interest in betting against right now. Therefore, he's my 5-weight Alex Pereira. What do you think, Jose?
Yeah, Nick, I totally agree with you. It's really hard to bet against Alex Pereira, just how good he's been. He just keeps winning, and he's a finisher for sure. So that being said, seeing him just how dominant he's been and him beating Yuri already, I'm going with Alex Pereira, and he's my 5-weight as well. And until proven otherwise, I have no reason to want to bet against Alex Pereira, even if it's against Yuri Prochazka. And that being said, when it comes to the striking, I think we're going to see something similar again. Alex at some point piecing him up, and if he doesn't knock Yuri out, he's probably going to win unanimous decision. And if it goes to the feet, Yeah, I didn't really see much impressive. I thought I was gonna see more wrestling out of Yuri, but in the first round, so it could be something similar. Like if he's not really holding in and trying to out wrestle Alex Pereira and at least get the control time and beat him up that avenue, then yeah, 100% all the way to Alex Pereira. Yuri is though, if he does go that other route, which I just don't think will happen because we have yet to see Alex Pereira really get truly dominated and out wrestled in the UFC. Um, but Yuri, like I do like him as an underdog though. There's some parts where I think he can catch Alex Pereira, but it would probably be more like a submission, or if anything, because again, on the feet, I'm giving it all to Alex Pereira. Striking, everything, Alex Pereira is just a little more composed and technical with his striking. Yuri gets a little too crazy and creative, and it can be to his detriment too, because as he's just being unorthodox, he still gets clipped up, which is what happened the first time when he was fighting Alex Pereira. He was getting a little comfortable and starting to back Alex Pereira up into the cage. He landed some good shots, but at the end of the day, Alex Pereira was actually landing more shots on Yuri overall, and ultimately led to that knockout. So I think it'd be something similar. Yuri's probably, if it's gonna be, if it's on the feet too long, Yuri's probably gonna get a little wild and creative and land some power bombs on Alex Pereira for sure. But at the end of the day, I think just Alex Pereira's striking IQ is so high that he's either going to knock Yuri out again or beat him unanimous decision. So that being said, yeah, I 100% agree with you on Alex Pereira, and he's also my five weight.
Man, and Alex Pereira is right now as minus 184, so he is the favorite, but honestly, not like an insanely heavy favorite. I don't feel like. I feel like that's a good value for a guy as good as Pereira because there's a good chance we're gonna look back on his career and he could be considered one of the goats, if not the goat. If he continues this trajectory, he could be one of the first people to get three belts in his career. Because who's to say at this point who's gonna stop him from going into a heavyweight fight at 230 pounds and just KOing somebody? Like he doesn't have to be 265. He can be 230 and still look just as big as a lot of the heavyweights. So I'm just saying he's one of those guys where it's like, dang, how did this guy at one point show up at 185? You know, and then how did he show up at 205? And it's like one of those things. So I'm just saying, man, that's a great value on a guy like Pereira. And you could even like, if you really wanted to like squeeze some value out of it, which I would say why not? You could say Alex Pereira by TKO or points, get the double chance win, and do minus 165. So of course they don't give you too much more on it because Pereira's never going to get a submission. I think you and I both know that. It's very unlikely, at least. Maybe if Jerry tries to wrestle and gets himself in a really bad spot, like, yeah, Pereira will choke him out if he's stupid. But I just don't see that really happening. Jerry's pretty good at scrambling, too, as we saw against Glover. So, in any case, if you want to squeeze a little more value out of it, take that double chance on Pereira. It's almost guaranteed to hit. But even further than that, just Pereira by KO again. Like, I'm sad to say, I like Prochazka more, but I just respect Pereira. Like you don't disrespect who could currently be the best fighter in the world. I mean, I think him and John Jones are on a direct trajectory. Like screw Tom Aspinall at this point. Honestly, like no offense to Tom Aspinall, I need to see John Jones versus Pereira next. Like straight up, that's just gotta happen. In my because I don't want it to be another John Jones or sorry, I don't want it to be another Francis John Jones thing where we just never see it because it took too long to evaporate to happen. You know.
Yeah, yeah, right on. And that would be a fun one. I wonder, I would be curious to see how his power would translate to heavyweight though, just because that weight discrepancy between light heavyweight and heavyweight is bigger than the other weight classes. So
Mm-hmm.
I would be interested to see how that power would move up. But in terms of going toe to toe with anyone, him and John Jones would be a fun fight, especially on the feet. I just can't help but think John Jones is just gonna want to do what he did to Cyril Gahn
Oh
to
yeah,
Alex Pereira.
yeah,
Like I
that's
think,
true.
and it would almost give us like the most boring fight ever, and I'm almost mad. I went out of my way to
But if
watch
you
it.
give him a full
But
camp though, like you don't, would you think that like training with Glover though, like wouldn't he be able to at least gain like a good ability to sprawl and defend himself from like I'm not saying Pereira would be like, oh, call the ambulance, but not for me, and submit John Jones. But I'm just saying like Pereira would at least train himself to be good enough at preventing a takedown to keep it on the feet. What do
Right.
you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Which, yeah, I would, that's something. Yeah, we'll probably see this weekend because again, Yuri. I think that would be Yuri's path to victory is to really engage more in the grappling and wrestling departments. So
Yeah.
that'd be a good indicator this weekend to see if Yuri takes that approach, how Alex will respond. So yeah.
Sounds good. Well, since that was both of our five weights, then I'll move on and let you give your four weight. Second highest confidence.
So for my four weight, this is the featherweight bout between Brian Ortega and Diego Lopez. Right now, Brian Ortega, he's actually the betting underdog at plus 112, while Diego Lopez is the betting favorite at minus 142. This one, I'm actually going with the underdog, Brian T. City. The reason is he's looked so good just beating Yair Rodriguez and getting a late third round submission on him. It just shows that he's still got it in him. The thing with Ortega is he's not as active. He hasn't fought as much since 2020, and he's got two losses, but one of them was that injury to Yair Rodriguez, and then the other one was an unanimous decision loss to Alexander Volkanovski, which is no shame in that. But other than that, yeah, he's only really lost to the best of the best, like Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski. But other than that, the rest of the division really has been his. And Diego Lopez, he's just looking phenomenal, just finishing people in the first round, 3 wins in a row. He does have that loss to Mosfar Evloev about a year ago, May 6th. And he lost a unanimous decision. And ultimately, I think that's how this fight's probably going to end up going. Is if anything, Brian Ortega may end up just outclassing Diego Lopez and beating him via unanimous decision. And the reason I think that is, even though Diego Lopez does have more fights than Brian Ortega and he's younger than Brian Ortega, I just think the resume, the level of competition Brian Ortega has compared to Diego Lopez is far superior and says a lot more. Diego Lopez has not been in the UFC as long as Brian Ortega as well. And again, Brian Ortega's already fought for the belt and he's fought the best of the best. It's really hard to write him off like that. Then, especially coming off a win against Yair Rodriguez, which Yair Rodriguez himself, he this Brian Ortega loss being his most recent loss, but before that, similar situation to Brian Ortega, he's only lost to the best of the best, Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway. Frank Edgar, long time ago in 2017. But that being said, like Brian Ortega is showing that he can still beat dudes at the top of the game in this division, no matter how inactive he is, how long he's been out, all the injuries he's been through. He's still coming back time and time and again and proving how good he is. And even in the striking department, too, like when he fought the Korean Zombie, just a masterclass performance on the feet as well. And I think that's ultimately what's going to actually take this win, even though both these guys are big jiu-jitsu guys. I think Brian Ortega they're probably both going to just look, I think we're going to get good grappling overall on the floor. So I think where Brian Ortega is going to stand out most against Diego Lopez will be on the feet. So that being said, I got Brian T. City winning this. I think it's most likely going to be unanimous decision. Also because Diego Lopez, even though he's not been in the UFC that long, he is a tough guy. So I have Brian Ortega for this one, and I have him as my four weight. What are your thoughts on this fight, Nick?
Man, it's not sure. I'd have to look back on our picks to see if this has happened before, but this will actually be, if not, if it's happened, it's one of the most rare occurrences for us to both actually match our 5 and 4 weight picks independently. Because I'd also have Brian Ortega also as my 4 weight. Brian Ortega to me is insane value as the underdog here, plus 112. That is one of the main reasons I have him here. On top of course, I think he's going to win the fight, but dang, plus 112 to get him as an underdog. I'd still put money on him as a favorite in this fight, and make sure to get that before he becomes a favorite if he does. I'm completely agreeing with Jose here. I think Ortega completely outclasses on the feet more than anything else, and with experience. Yeah, okay, he lost via shoulder injury to Yair Rodriguez and got to avenge that loss earlier this year. I think exactly what you said. He still has it. Of course, he was beating some of the best back in 2017, 2018. Of course, he lost to Max Holloway, but it wasn't like he necessarily like wanted to stop fighting. They just called the fight. Doctor called the fight. Blah blah blah. he did lose, like he was losing, of course. But what I'm trying to say is he wasn't necessarily finished. And Brian Ortega is a guy that I just don't see getting finished in this fight. And that's what Diego Lopez has needed to get every win he's had in the UFC so far. If the fight has gone to decision, he has lost. And I'll give it to him. He's fought some studs, right? Joe Anderson Brito is a stud, and Evloev is a stud too. But I still consider Ortega to be an insane step up. Like, Ortega's a big step up from those kinds of guys. And I think we can rely on the fact that he's going to be the Ortega we expect him to be because we saw him succeed and do really well against Yair. I thought at least he did really well. He might not have been perfect by any means, and he did get outstruck by Yair, and Yair also landed a knockdown. So Ortega was far from perfect, right? And you could easily make the argument that he was losing the fight, probably. Maybe not probably, but you could make the argument that he was losing the fight. I mean, he had a lot of control time, but he got the finish, and that's in the end what veterans will do. I think by far, if someone gets the finish in this fight, it's going to be Ortega, not Lopez, even if they're on the ground doing jiu-jitsu. I just think Ortega's got too much experience. Lopez is amazing. I get it. I'm a big fan of Lopez. Got to see him fight live. Jose and I did in Nashville. It was amazing. And ever since then, I've been riding him and betting money on him because he's great. But this is just not the same matchup, right? Pat Sabatini and Sadiq Youssef are not the same matchup as Brian Ortega. It's just as simple as that. He's not going to KO Brian Ortega. And if he does, I'm going to be losing money because I'm going to have some on Brian Ortega on Saturday. He's my 4-weight.
Yeah, and you know what? To add another thing too is just the matchup, just number 3 versus number 14 in the rankings. I feel like I just a lot. They've been pairing up a bunch of these guys that are just breaking into the top 15 with these top 5 guys, and I feel like almost every time it's the top, even whether they're an underdog, like when Dustin Poirier fought Saint Denis. You know, he was the underdog in that too, and ends up getting a win. And same with just most recently Robert Whittaker and Ikram. Ikram just a hot prospect, moving up in the middleweight division, and then gets paired up with an easily number 1 contender right there in Robert Whittaker, and gets outclassed immediately. So yeah, just the matchup just alone too. Like I know rankings don't mean everything, but I think it does kind of help just clear a somewhat of the picture that yeah, these like, you know, these number 3 for a reason, and maybe these top 15 guys should be going with other 10 to 15 first, because yeah, I think Diego Lopez just broke into the top 15 not long ago, so he hasn't even been ranked that long. So that being said, yeah, I feel better. I feel better with Brian Ortega as my 4-weight.
Yeah, man, for sure. And I don't have any specific data on it, but I've heard people talking about with USADA now not around. They're doing their own like in-house drug testing or whatever since USADA's over with. There's actually been an uptick in older fighters winning. Usually, like during USADA, it would often be like, and it was more applicable if it was like a guy in their low 30s versus maybe a guy in their upper 30s or in the 40s. But like, I'm just making the point that like we're also seeing guys that are maybe have been in the game for a while. We're not going to talk about Andrei Arlovsky, but he's another one on this card. Like, I wouldn't just completely write him off because he's old. Like, I don't really have any stake in that fight. I'm not going to be betting on it. But, like, I wouldn't just completely write him off because he's old. Older fighters have been successful without USADA. I'm not making any comments or any accusations to anybody, but that's just the raw data is showing it. So, you know, we'll see if that continues. I wouldn't say Brian Ortega is old at all, but he is like a pretty seasoned veteran, I would say, at this point. And like you said, Lopez is more breaking on the scene. So, yeah, I don't see Ortega getting finished. This should be some good money for him as a dog. So that said, we're gonna move on. That was both Jose and I's 5-weight and 4-weights matching. Our 5-weights are again the most confident picks of Saturday afternoon, which tonight is Alex Pereira, and our 4-weights also match. It was Brian Ortega. So then we also still have 3 more weights to go through. 3, 2, 1. 3 is the third most confident, and for me, that's actually going to be Michael Venom Page, who's fighting Ian Gary on the main card here. And it's currently listed, I believe, as the opening fight on the main card, even though there is I'm not going to dog the women's fight, but It isn't necessarily like the most exciting main card fight, and it's also not even opening the main card. They're keeping it as the second fight on the main card. So we're being blessed with MVP coming off his win against Kevin Holland, his second fight in the UFC against Ian Machado Gary. This is going to be such an interesting fight, and it was honestly hard for me to put a weight on this pick because I'm pretty convinced that MVP can get the job done. Hence his 3-weight pick. He's still more confident than the next two fights we're going to discuss. But man, Ian Gary has done really well against guys that I wasn't sure he'd be able to beat. I was skeptical on him beating Jeff Neal, of course Neil Magny as well, but they went to decision, and Jeff Neal got the split decision loss. It wasn't a unanimous either. Ian Gary's been kind of like just trying to dice people up, staying at distance and doing his thing. And I just, in the end, what pushes me to Michael Page is that I think that's exactly what he does best. I think we've seen like already some of the crazy like spinning elbows and spinning back fists and spinning kicks and like all kinds of show things that actually work and like phase the fighter he's fighting against, and it worked. Like Michael Page kind of diced up Kevin Holland, and Kevin Holland landed a couple takedowns, but it wasn't a threat really at any point. Michael Page was able to get back up, and it wasn't that big of an issue to the general scheme of the fight. He still got the unanimous decision win. So to me, you're getting some great value. Michael Venom Page is another underdog pick here. You're getting him at plus 114, and he has been there. He's done that, and I just don't see Gary standing at distance getting his job done when that's exactly what Michael Page succeeds at most. It's just Michael Page will be at distance. He'll throw some crazy kicks that Ian Gary's never seen before, and he's gonna quickly put his tail between his legs, in my opinion. So 3-weight on the dog MVP. Jose, what do you have?
Yeah, Nick. So for this one, this will be the first one we were going to disagree on. I am going with the younger Ian Gary, and reason is because he has yet to lose. He has more UFC experience than Michael Page already. Not like it means anything. Michael Page has had a long Bellator career, but a lot of the dudes that Michael Venom Page has been like I just don't like are not that good. Douglas Lima is probably Douglas Lima and Paul Daly are two of the better guys he's beaten before the UFC for sure. And then he obviously just beating Kevin Holland, just outclassing him in general, like was good. But I think Ian Gary in general is a different fighter. I think if Ian Gary fights Kevin Holland, I got Ian Gary on that. I think Ian Gary he's shown what he can do against veterans and good fighters too. Like for example, Neil Magny. I think Neil Magny he's in a win loss right now, but dude's a big guy and he was at the top of his game like in the top 10 and he's been hanging out as a ranked fighter for a long time in the division. And I think Michael Venom Page he doesn't offer anything too unique to this division. Besides, his style is crazy, but it would have been better to see Michael Venom Page when he was in his earlier 30s, not in his late 30s. And I think that's a big thing why I'm going with Ian Gary as well. He's 26 years old and he has power. Out of his 14 wins, half of them come by KO/TKO. And if not that, he looks good. He does have that split decision. His most recent win is that split decision win to Jeff Neal. And Jeff Neal, like, dude, like he's a beast. So like he's not the best guy, but he's got some good wins over Vicente Luque and Santiago Ponzinibbio, and obviously he's already running a 2-fight losing streak. But that being said, I think Ian Gary overall is the better fighter than MVP. MVP, what he does have that does kind of worry me a bit is besides the unique striking is also a reach advantage. He has a 3.5 reach advantage over Ian Gary. Both guys are 6'3", but when it comes to the feet, there could be a chance that Michael Venom Page may get the better end of some exchanges, but I think Ian Gary is going to get the harder hits at the end of the day. I think he's going to deliver more power and possibly if he doesn't put out Michael Venom Page, he barely gets knocked out, but he has been when he gets caught. So if Ian Gary can catch him, because Ian Gary, even though he doesn't have the same reach advantage as Michael Venom Page, he is still a big guy, and if he reaches it, like I do think he can possibly put Michael Venom Page out. If not, possibly just beat him again by decision. Maybe split again, just similar to the Jeff Neal situation, or unanimous, kind of like the Neil Magny situation. I'm going with the hype on this one. I'm going with Ian Gary, and again, just because he's younger and powerful and has yet to lose. Michael Venom Page, he has a long career, and I respect him a lot. So him as the underdog is a lot of value. Though I do see a lot of value. Michael Venom Page as an underdog. But that being said, yeah, Ian Gary, he's my 2 weight, so that says a lot too. Ian Gary being my 2 weight, I wasn't that like I do. That's just how much um value I see in Michael Venom Page, whether he's a dog or not. That he is a legit dangerous fighter, but until I see Michael Venom Page fight in the UFC more, it's going to be kind of hard to assess where he really belongs. For me, at least, just because again, his age is definitely something a little bit to my concern, just a little bit. So that being said, yeah, I got Ian Gary as my 2 weight.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think that's a fair argument, man. And Ian Gary, I could totally see him dicing up and kind of staying and doing his thing at distance too. He probably does. It's hard to say if he has more power or not because you make a good point in that uh, we've seen MVP in a longer career, but it doesn't feel like the competition. It's like if a football player stayed to playing in college for like more years, and it was like, yeah, okay, so they're dominating in college, but is it really? Are they really going to dominate in the NFL too? And I hate to like demean Bellator like that, but in all reality, a lot of the depth in Bellator is not great, especially compared to what the UFC has. So um, can't deny the fact at all that you're right. MVP hasn't had the strength of opponent or competition that a guy like Gary has had since he's been in the UFC now for like 7 or 8 fights or something like that. So it's definitely going to be an interesting fight, and it's part of the reason I also dropped Michael Page down to my 3 weight, but I still am confident in the end. I mentioned with the age thing earlier that older fighters have been successful this year, and I think that'll continue. I think MVP is an exception to that, especially like he's gonna be a beast for at least another year and a half. Like yes, he's approaching his 30s. Come like 2026, 2027, but at that point, I think we're already going to have a real good idea if he is ever going to have a chance to really get to the high echelon of this division, or if he's just going to be kind of like the high end Showtime. It's fun to watch him fight kind of guy, but otherwise he's just going to ride out in the sunset with the UFC kind of thing. So for this one, I will stick with 3 weight MVP. I think he throws a lot of interesting strikes and style towards Gary that even though Gary has more UFC experience, he's not going to have seen that kind of thing. A lot of the fighters he's fought, like Jeff Neal and Neil Magny, I'm not trying to demean them, but they're kind of basic generic strikers that are easier to prepare for, I feel like. And even before that, like Daniel Rodriguez, Song Kanan, like those aren't really that impressive of fighters. I think it's easy to say that MVP cleans them all too. So this really just will be a litmus test for them both, and I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that too. And that's last part that you said right there, where if MVP fought the same dudes that Ian Gary fought, I do think he beats D Rod and Neil Magny and Jeff Neal. I do think that, and I do think it'll be they may even be better fights than what Ian Gary put up. But that being said, there's only one way to know, which would be this fight. And
Yep.
yeah, and that being said, uh, we both he's your through it, and I'm so you're confident. You're a little more confident in MVP than what I am in Ian Gary. Ian Gary being my 2 weight.
Yeah. So yeah, that being said, let's go to your 3 weight.
So for my 3 weight, this is the main event of the prelims. The middleweight bout between Joe Pyfer and Marc Andre Barriault. Right now, Joe Pyfer is the betting favorite. He's a big betting favorite at minus 290, while Marc Andre Barriault is the betting underdog at plus 215. For this one, I'm going with Joe Pyfer, even though he got outclassed by Jack Hermanson. I don't know if we'll see the same coming out, like the same type of performance from his opponent in Marc Andre Barriault. Marc Andre Barriault, he is on the older side too. He's 34, and he's 16-7 too. So and That being said, like he's not that he's not the that I don't want to say he's a bad fighter. Definitely not. He's good to some degree, but he hasn't really beaten anyone um really notable, I guess. And he has losses. Like he has his most, which is probably one of like the best opponents he's had, which is Chris Curtis, and he did go to split decision with Chris Curtis. But what I think Joe Pyfer brings to the table is just more power and just raw power. I think he's just gonna step forward, and I think he has the opportunity to possibly knock out Marc Andre Barrios. He's only been knocked out once, but if he doesn't knock him out, obviously it's going to be decision. And I'm going with Joe Pyfer just because the power and he did look not the best against Jack Hermanson. Jack Hermanson kind of outclassed him on the feet, even though Jack Hermanson is a big grappler. But that being said, in this matchup, I would say Joe Pyfer is definitely going to be the better grappler. I think he's going to take Marc Andre Barrios down and just ground and pound him. And I think it's probably going to be a ground and pound. If he doesn't finish Marc Andre Barrios, it's just going to be a ground and pound and win with control time to unanimous decision. It probably I don't see this being like the most exciting fight. To be honest, I don't see it being the most exciting fight. I think it's just gonna be a fight where he just needs to get in and do what needs to be done. Just take Marc Andre Barrios down and just ground and pound his way to victory. How they match up size wise, Joe Pyfer, they're pretty much the same size too. Joe Pyfer's 6'2", Marc Andre Barrios is 6'1". Joe Pyfer only has a 1 inch reach advantage over him. So, and when it comes to the striking, Marc Andre Barrios, he has been in the UFC longer than he's been in the UFC since 2019. So he's racked up quite a bit of experience now. And when it comes to his striking, he lands 6.19 significant strikes per minute, and he does absorb 5.67. So Joe Pyfer's not been in the UFC as much, but I'm thinking like if Joe Pyfer does step forward and throw some heavy haymakers, he can definitely land at least one of them to clip Marc Andre Barrios down. But if not, Marc Andre Barrios does have a somewhat strong wrestling takedown defense. So when Joe Pyfer does it gets the opportunity to take Marc Andre Barrios down, I think that's where it's going to be just almost like a ground and pound type of situation. Maybe even a submission. To be honest, Marc Andre Barrios never uh, my bad. He has been submitted only once, and Joe Piper's got 3 submissions on his record. So it could even be like wears him down on the ground and eventually look for a submission. So that being said, yeah, I think Joe Piper um takes this one. How he wins, it can go many different ways the way I view it. So he is my 3 weight though. So I like Joe Piper. He's my 3 weight. What are your thoughts on this fight, Nick?
So we'll disagree on this one as well. I'm it's kind of a reverse, but I'm a little less confident. Reverse in the sense that I'm less confident, like you were on the last pick too, but it's my 1 weight. So obviously by proxy, I'm picking Marc Andre Barrialt for my 1 weight. Part of it, I think, is its great value as the dog there, because you mentioned how heavy of a favorite Piper is, and it's for a decent enough reason, because there's no doubt that Piper stores pretty much all of the power benefit in this fight, and at any time he could clip Marc Andre Barrialt and knock him out. So that is a real possibility. Piper has tendency to finish a lot of his fights. He was able to finish multiple guys in a row earlier on before losing to Jack Hermanson. And the one thing I have to have picked Marc Andre is the fact that you did mention too, he's only been knocked out once in his career, and I'll give it to you. Like, he hasn't fought an insane list of fighters, but he has fought some guys like Christoph Jaka, who is popped for steroids. So he fought a really good boxer that was on steroids and didn't get knocked out. So hey, there's some things going for him. He fought Chidi Niokwani, and that was the one time he did get knocked out. So does Joe Pyfer have the power Chidi does? Yeah, probably. But I'm going to err on the side that I think Marc Andre has learned from his mistakes. And yeah, he's also lost to Chris Curtis most recently, but I think Chris Curtis would really give Joe Pyfer a run for his money too, because Chris Curtis has a unique style, almost kind of like Sean Strickland, but not really at the same time. And in all reality, man, we just saw Joe Pyfer get outclassed by Hermanson pretty badly. Uh, I don't want to dog on Hermanson, but that fight was supposed to be like kind of a cruise to victory win for Pyfer. He was supposed to go in there and kind of get the job done, like not fight for 25 minutes and get a decision loss. Like, Pyfer, I'll give it to him. If he learns from those mistakes and like moves his head more and avoids damage instead of just worrying about giving damage, actually thinks about defensive boxing too, I'll give it to him. He's probably got a really good chance to win the fight, and that's kind of why Marc Andre is my one weight. But hey, I think Marc Andre in general, especially if we see the Pfeiffer we see from Hermansson's fight, oh yeah, Marc Andre will get this job done the same way Hermansson did. He'll dice him up. He'll stay at the distance. He'll keep piecing him up, similar to what we saw with Volkov against Pavlovich too. It'll be a similar, like, just outbox him. Go ahead, try knock me out, dude. Go ahead. You're not going to. And that'll be Marc Andre Barrial's path to victory. You might as well parlay Marc Andre with over or Marc Andre by points, because it's unlikely he knocks out Pfeiffer, but that's his path to victory is definitely by decision.
Yeah, this is the one we're definitely obviously disagreeing on. And without a doubt, yeah, that fight that Jack Hermansson and Joe Pfeiffer, you're right. Like that should have been a almost like give me to Joe Pfeiffer, and he did not show up, and that is worrisome for me. Like, is he gonna if he's the same fighter that shows up that showed up for the Jack Hermansson fight, then this very well can be Marc Andre Barrial's fight for the taking for sure. Because yeah, going to toe to toe again that most recent loss going toe to toe with Chris Curtis, I agree too. That does give Joe Pfeiffer a run for his money. Chris Curtis, at this point, I do see most likely beating Joe Pfeiffer as well, just given the experience. That being said, yeah, this is one we're going to have to disagree on. Joe Pfeiffer, if there's anything, like, yeah, I'm not like he's my 3-weight, but like yeah. This one we'll have to agree to disagree on. So I'll just keep it at that. He is my 3-weight. I definitely see the flaws where if Joe Pfeiffer doesn't show up and he just is just terrible on the feet, he can lose this one. But I think I think this is going to be at a redemption fight, because I truly think if he rematches Jack Hermansson again in the future, and learns from his mistakes there, he could dominate Jack Hermansson. I don't want to say outclass, but just dominate. Like, because you don't have to be that good in many particular ways. You just have to be good at one thing and just dominate someone with it. So that being said, yeah, I got Joe Pfeiffer as my 3-weight. You got Marc Andre Barrial as your 1-weight. This one we're definitely disagreeing on.
Yes, sir. So that'll take us to the last fight of the night for us to discuss, and that's going to be my 2-weight. And I'm going to put my 2-weight on the second fight of the night. I believe it's or no, it would actually be the feature fight of the night, because I think the second fight of the night is the women's fight. But this is the Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze fight, in which has been mixed up, switched around. Multiple fighters in this fight have accepted and dropped out, and the fight has completely switched from what used to be 2 guys and is now 2 completely different guys fighting each other. Landed on Smith and Dolidze. So these guys are both, as weird as it sounds, they're both last-minute replacements technically to the fight against each other. It's almost like Jiri and Alex Pereira, right? They're both kind of last-minute replacement main event. So they both don't have a full camp, and same with Smith and Dolidze here. So I'm taking Dolidze with my 2-weight, and I'm going to avoid Anthony Smith once more here. I understand he's coming off a win. He's coming off of a submission win, though, and I still think he's going to struggle against a higher-end striker, and he isn't going to have, in my opinion, he at least much of a grappling advantage, if any at all. I understand Anthony Smith has 15 submission wins, but Dolidze's never been submitted, and he's got 3 submission wins of his own. He's proven his own with over a takedown average per fight as well. Dolidze's been able to wrestle some of his opponents pretty seamlessly. In fact, speaking of a guy that kind of diced up the guy we were discussing in the last fight, Joe Pfeiffer, Dolidze handled Jack Hermansson by using a little bit of wrestling and using 3 submission attempts en route to getting that win. And even though he did all those submission attempts, he wins the fight by KO. I think Roman Dolidze also possesses some power in this fight, and it's one of those things where I don't want the guy who has the testy chin. And I'm sure, to those who want Anthony Smith or think Anthony Smith will win the fight, they'll point out like, oh, look, they're the same age. You would think Anthony Smith is so old and he's a dinosaur, but they're the same age. And oh yeah, I get that. Dolidze and Anthony Smith are the same age, but they are far from the same amount of time in the cage, and the same amount of force exerted to the brain, to me, is just not even close. Roman Dolidze has fought in 15 professional MMA fights, so you could also make the argument the experience is a completely different ball game, and that's true. But I still think Dolidze has proven that he can beat some of the higher end, top end fighters, whatever you want to say, in some of his wins against Jack Hermanson. Okay, maybe Phil Hawes isn't amazing, but it was a first round finish. So it's not like he messed around and went to decision with Phil Hawes. He finished him. Marvin Vettori's been up there in the middleweight division for however long, and Imavov is a good fighter too, and that wasn't even an what do you call that? Wasn't even a unanimous decision, anyways. So look, I'm taking Dolidze here, 2 weight. I think it's a great spot for him. He is a slight favorite here, but in the end, I'm still not quite as confident in him as I am some of the other fighters. Jose, what do you think?
Yeah, Nick, for this one, uh, it's obviously my one weight, and I time and time again have gone with Anthony Smith, and he's time and time again disappointed me. And then I go against Anthony Smith, and he disappoints me again because he wins. And that being said, I was gonna go Roman Dolidze as my one weight, but just because Roman Dolidze is moving up a weight class, and it's kind of like a last minute thing as well. It's really a last minute thing for both guys, and I'm just gonna stick with Anthony Smith just because uh, he's just naturally the bigger guy. He's been at this weight class longer. I do think. I mean, how they match up physically though. I think they're both about the same actually height and well, actually Anthony Smith is 6'4", Roman Dolidze is 6'2", but both have the same reach of 76 reach. So that being said, like on the feet, I don't think like no one's gonna be have any advantage over the other in terms of um, reach advantage. But when it comes to the grappling department too, I can see Roman Dolidze trying to take Anthony Smith down, but I've always said this about Anthony Smith. Even when he loses and he gets outclassed and gets knocked out, he is a well-rounded fighter. He can stand. He can stand on the feet if he shows up. He has been outclassed, but he does have hands and he does have the grappling too. He's got the submission game. He's got first round submission guillotine over Vitor Petrino most recently, just early in May. So, but then yeah, again, like I said, sometimes he gets outclassed. He gets outclassed and knocked down in the third round by Khalil Roundtree on the feet. And before that, he beats Ryan Spann, loses Johnny Walker, who we just can't get enough of Johnny Walker. And then, yeah, that being said, I think this is a fight Anthony Smith should win, just given that his size and just how well rounded he is. I haven't seen Roman Dolidze like I think ever at this weight class, and Anthony Smith can do some things and learn from like what Marvin Vettori did, and even Nasruddin Emavov. And if Anthony Smith can get a hold of the control time and just not let Roman Dolidze let off, and just in terms of like land many punches and just control him, put him against the cage. Because Anthony Smith sometimes too, again, he's a well-rounded fighter, but being a well-rounded fighter doesn't always translate to being an exciting fighter either. So Anthony Smith, I think he's just gonna be a vet and put Roman Dolidze against the cage and just not let him do anything. Control him and try to sneak in a submission wherever he can, whether it's on the feet or on the ground. And Anthony Smith, I guarantee, will not even care if he gets taken down. I think he's just gonna almost let it happen. And on the feet, Roman Dolidze, I think he's probably gonna win a few rounds. If it goes all 3 rounds, I can see Roman Dolidze winning a round for sure. He will probably land some punches, but at the end of the day, I think either Anthony Smith is going to win via submission or decision. I don't know if he'll put out Roman Dolidze, but it is a possibility. Roman Dolidze has never been knocked out, but he is again going to get. He's moving up to a different weight class, kind of last minute. So that being said, I'm going with Anthony Smith on this. I'm not the most confident, obviously, in Anthony Smith. He is my one weight, and again, he is also a plus 122 underdog. So that being said, yeah, I'm going with Anthony Smith on this, but I see more value in him being the more experienced fighter in this division.
For sure. Yeah, makes sense, man. I think that's totally fair, and it's a good reason why both of us are a little lower confidence. But we'll stick with the disagreement here. I've got a 2-weight on Roman Dolidze getting the job done. You've got a 1-weight on Lionheart Anthony Smith. Either way, it'll be exciting. It's likely not one I'm going to put any money on. But as a quick recap, the ones we will be putting some money on here at Moneyline MMA at least is of course going to be Alex Pereira as our one weights, and then Brian Ortega as our two weights. And Ortega is a juicy underdog. Can't ask for much more there. If you like my picks lately, they've been pretty hot. You're going to go with MVP Michael Page next. I'm very confident he gets the job done against Gary, and he's the dog. I think he's a very live dog there. And you make a little parlay, put like a couple of dollars on MVP plus Ortega plus Pereira, and you're going to be a happy camper with the potential return you're getting, as two of those three are underdogs. And it's just one of those spots that I think is really valuable there. But make sure to put a very small chunk of your total betting value on that, as you're going to want to put individual money on Alex Pereira. Make single bets mainly. Put most of it on Pereira. You do it in units. Put a couple units on Pereira, a couple units on Ortega, and that way, if something goes crazy wrong, this is cage fighting, you still won't lose everything because it's in a parlay. So I'm happy to give as much betting advice as folks would like. We're going to continue to win money here at Moneyline MMA, so subscribe and let us know down below who you'll be siding with in those disagreements. I believe we have the week off after this fight card, and then after that we have some fight nights going into July. So keep in touch. We'll be back the Monday night before our next UFC card. Thanks for listening.